On Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi, today I'm in conversation with Neha Kirpal. I talked to her about what it was like to set up the India Art Fair back when she was a 26-year-old, and as she says, with nothing to lose. She talks about the highs and the successes that are well documented in the headlines and usually what we end up reading about. But she's also very open about what was going on behind the scenes. And some of that heartbreaking journey is really what's given her the power and the mission that seems to be her life's work. Listen to this little clip of what she had to say when I asked her what it took for a 26-year-old to come up with the India Art Fair as an idea and then go and pitch and get funding for it by securing a loan and trying to convince all kinds of naysayers. It was not the answer I was expecting.
When you're 26 and you don't really have anything to lose and you don't really have anything to prove, and you're already written off. I mean, I feel like me and my family, and for the mental health challenges that we had been through and the level of stigma, ostracization, and sort of insecurity that I faced growing up, I really felt like I was a shadow of a person. And so it didn't really matter what anyone thought of me, or frankly, at that point, even what I had in mind for my life. I don't think I had a plan. I stumbled on an idea and I was keen to pursue it. And the more people said no, the more passionate I was.
Now that you've heard that clip, let's dive straight into this episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi. We'll, of course, have resources for you as well in the show notes. Let's listen in. Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi. A special shout out to our listeners in Guwahati, Kolkata, New Delhi, Chennai, Pune, and Bengaluru. We've been hearing that these are our top 6 cities since we kicked off in July, and I'm very excited to have you here joining us for this episode. Whatever city you're in, do give us a shout and do listen in as we speak now to the wonderful Neha Kirpal. She's joining us from Mumbai. Neha is a social entrepreneur, and I'm going to bring her on so you can say hi, and we're going to be seeing how we can introduce Neha. Hi there. And Neha, there's so many things I want to introduce you as, but let me stick to the facts first. You set up and ran the wildly successful India Art Fair, which is where you kind of, I think, hit the mainstream headlines in India and globally back in the day before you decided to, take a step back and sell it. And now you are as passionate about the mental health and mental illness landscape and, ensuring everyone has access to resources. You're the co-founder of Amaha. You're also the co-founder of the India Mental Health Alliance. And we're going to be talking to you about all of this and what makes you tick over the next 30 to 40 minutes. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know what I love, Neha, is that you have always been, and we were just talking about this briefly, centering around a mission, a purpose, and you talk about authenticity. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about what that means to you today as a leader? And then I'm going to take you back into the nostalgic past and talk to you about art and that whole scene.
Yeah, I feel like, coming in, sort of trying to make a contribution in the world of mental health has really been a sort of lifelong calling. Right from my childhood, our family suffered a lot because of mental health crisis. My mother's had schizophrenia since I was 5 years old. My brother passed a few years ago. And so for us, it really has been a quest to look at how we can make a difference in the mental health landscape in the country. So I've been looking at it since I was 5 years old or 10 years old. And so it really was a homecoming and a natural choice. And my interest is really to try and enable easy access and early intervention and try and make sure that for the severest challenges, we're able to help people unpack that and figure out how they're going to navigate their journey of care, right? Because often it's people feel blindsided, they feel lost, lonely, scared, and they don't really know how to get help. So we're hoping to build one ecosystem where, some people can have all the support they need, and for their families and young children, if they had any mental health struggles that they were dealing with. And today, Amaha has people from 600 cities coming around across our online and offline services. So it's work That's to be done. Start, yeah.
So I will talk to you a little bit about, the things that have changed, the things you're hoping to impact and change. And, even personally, we've been having conversations around mental health and illness for several years now. We've seen a change in how people, earlier would not really talk so openly about lived experience. There's still a lot of, I think it still takes a lot of courage because there's still a lot of stigma around this. But, we're seeing more and more of these stories now in the mainstream, as it were. But let me pause for a second and start, ask you how you kicked off your career, because you've also had many different identities, which I find fascinating. And I was reading this lovely interview in the Indian Express from earlier this year, around when the India Art Fair was going on, and you were attending that as well. And basically, if we rewind to 2002, 2007 or 8, apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're thinking it was time back then for India to have a world-class art fair. You've actually at this point been to several abroad. You think the time is right. It doesn't sound like everyone agrees with you, but you still go ahead and ask your boss at the time for a loan of 1 crore rupees. And, according to that piece, and I was just trying to piece together what I've seen of your interviews over the years and our conversations, what gave you that kind of confidence that, hey, listen, I'm going to pick up and just do this? It's never been done. I'm betting on it, even if everyone else can't see that big picture. Can you take us through a little bit of what was going on back then?
Yeah, I feel like some of it was just innocent, and looking back, people will say it was very courageous. But frankly, when you're 26 and you don't really have anything to lose and you don't really have anything to prove, and you're already written off. I mean, I feel like me and my family, and for the mental health challenges that we had been through, and the level of stigma, ostracization, and sort of insecurity that I faced growing up, I really felt like I was a shadow of a person. And so it didn't really matter what anyone thought of me, or frankly, at that point, even what I had in mind for my life. I don't think I had a plan. I stumbled on an idea and I was keen to pursue it. And the more people said no, the more passionate I was. And, the stakes were fairly low for me, because I was just going to, give it all I've got and see what happens. 10 years later, I think about 5 or 6 years in, I realized that the real work here is done. And at that point, I realized that actually my main interest and passion is to build something from scratch, something that has a large systemic impact, that brings many communities and stakeholders together and creates an ecosystem that can then self-sustain, right? And go on for the long haul without the people who started it. So I'm very happy that I'm completely invisible on the art scene, and it's got wonderful wings with my former business partner, Sandy Angus, and a wonderful fair director, Jaya Ashokan, now in his 15th year. It's thriving, from the humble start that we had. So it's wonderful to see that grow, and to be able to detach and cut that umbilical cord and say, right, my job is done, and what else can I do now?
Well, I will tell you, and I want to come back to some of what you just shared about what you were going through as a young person, and that is very moving. So thank you for sharing that and being so open as always. But I will say, I've been to the India Art Fair maybe once, maybe twice, and it is just such a spectacle. It is so dizzying. I don't know what it takes to create something like that, and then what it takes to step away from something like that. I do know the first time I met you in person, in your favorite city and mine, it's grown on me off and on, in Mumbai. I was so surprised at how young you are, because I don't think I ever realized the person who set up the India Art Fair is actually my generation. 26, 27, you're deciding to set this up. You're like, I have nothing left to lose. I have nothing to lose, really. I have a good idea. You find presumably allies to back you, even if there are a lot of skeptics, right? Can you talk us through a little bit about what that means? Like, how much in your gut did you believe this is going to be successful? And did you even have time to second guess yourself, given all that was happening?
Well, I think, sometimes when you have an intention and you have a direction, you may not know what the end goal is, but you pursue that intention, right? And I think the belief is that as long as this can be something that is meaningful, that is impactful, that can move lives and change, or at least contribute to the changing of the art scene, then it's worth doing, right? And just simply with that narrative, it was a question of sort of showing up at various galleries and collectors and auction houses, and just looking at all the various embassies in Delhi and the cultural centers, and simply sort of painting this picture, right? Like dream a dream. And a lot of people realize that while they each had great work happening in silos, but there is this beauty in stringing it all together. And so if anything, I would only take some credit to sort of weave together the goodness and greatness that already existed, and be able to have a win-win for everyone. So for the students and young people to be able to bring art out into the field and pitch it in a tent and put 400 crores of arts from contemporary to modern masters, and such a treat, from India and all over the world. For the art collectors from all over the world to find a place in India that they could come to and gravitate to, that sort of opened the doors to art from South Asia. and for the galleries to be able to invigorate the art market in the country and create sort of real sort of solid potential. And it really, I launched it in the month, I think it was 2 months or 1 month after Lehman Brothers collapsed. So
Oh
not
God.
the smartest time, but it also became a time when people were hit so badly that they didn't know what to do, and everybody felt, let's get together. And I remember Renu Modi was the first gallerist of Gallery Espas, and then Peter Negi and a few others, and who came forward. And then one by one, the allyship grew, and I think people just saw an innocent dream, and everybody sort of said, let's give this a shot. But if it hadn't been for the collective, there would have been no India Art Fair. And it was always a self-sustaining business. It was it was a small business, and we kept it that way. And I'm glad it was able to, and it continues to make a difference in the art world, and is a place that becomes sort of a mecca of the art world, right? It brings the world's attention and the country's art stakeholders together. So it's a lot of joy. It's a lot of joy to be a visitor at something that you've been involved in the creation of.
And you don't have to stress, presumably, now when you visit. You can just enjoy the spectacle and show.
Enjoy the experience. And I remember it's like watching your child like out there somewhere in the world, and just enjoying it from the sidelines.
So cut to 2018, and you've decided by now that you're going to sell your stake and you want to get out. I mean, the job itself, as you said, you were done with the job itself. But why did you want to sell your stake and then move completely to another sector?
Yeah, well, I think, for me, as I've shared a few times, my entire life story is largely influenced by and colored by our family's mental health experiences. And because we dealt with so much trauma at a very young age, because of my mother's illness, we had over 10-15 years of no treatment and care, and a period of a decade when my mother and my younger brother had gone away, and we couldn't find them, and we kept looking for them all over the country. So, that traumatic period, as I went through my 10th boards and 12th boards, looking for, half of our family that was taken away by this disease, and then finding them 10 years later and bringing them back, and my mother's treatment course, it had all been very painful and traumatic. I think in my younger days, I dealt with it just by running, literally. So I played hockey, I played badminton, I played basketball. I just literally ran myself till I was tired and I would go to sleep. But I think around that time, it was sort of a phase of grieving and healing. And by the time I finished the 4th or 5th year of the art fair, I knew that it was now time, and I was now ready to do some real work. And at that point, then I started building the sort of succession plan, and the plan to be able to make not just an exit from the art world or the art fair, but make sure that it has a life of its own. And so I actually spent almost 3 years trying to really build a solid foundation, a solid team, great partners. We had the Sandy Angus of Montgomery, but we also had the Art Basel folks come in, and just to really make sure that even if it goes to the lowest bidder in the room, but it is the highest impact and the most longevity for the art fair. And then it was time to start again, and with great pleasure and joy to come back home and work in mental health and be in the familiar terrain and language of severe mental illness, talking to people who speak my language, who understand me, who are like me, being in and out of rehabs, looking at what's going on in the country. I spent 1 year just studying everything I could globally in the space of mental health, and visited about 250 organizations across 8 countries, actually, just to understand what are people doing that is actually working, how are people actually delivering quality care in the community, and how are we enabling communities to take care of themselves in a sustainable way. And that's what brought me to my business partner, Amit Malik. And here we are at Amaha since 2019.
And, so when you're doing this groundwork and research and really connecting with people in the community, at this stage, are you feeling comfortable to tell people what your experience has been? And I can only imagine, because I've heard you speak about this, and as you are today, again, with great appreciation. I mean, I do know it makes other people feel less alone. We know this when people are able to speak openly or use their platforms to kind of, deploy that sort of empathy and shared experience. At that stage, though, I am curious to know whether you found it easier to share some of what you've been through, or did that take some time?
I think I remember the first time I did it. It was some sort of a TED platform, and it was right after I had sold the art fair. And it was the first time I spoke publicly about our family. And the very second time was at a plenary at the World Economic Forum summit, the Young Global Leaders Summit in San Francisco. And it was very hard. I mean, I remember for the San Francisco one with 400 young global leaders in the room and a big stage, I remember sitting on the base of the stage and giving my entire talk. I just couldn't even go up on stage. But I think after the first few times, what I realized very, very quickly is that all it takes is for one person to share. And when that happens, the room opens up like nothing, right? Because I feel like, mental health, mental illness, challenges around anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, sexual abuse. I mean, all of these themes exist in all of our families, in every home, right? We just don't know where to go to have this conversation. Some people have held it for 20 years. Some people have held it for decades, right? And the minute you talk about it, a story always comes back. And so, for lack of a better expression, and just to say it in a slightly lighter note, it's almost a foot in the door. It's almost a door opener. I mean, I pretty much lead every conversation. Even in a formal introduction, I will say, I'm a care partner and a mental health ambassador, and my mother's dealt with schizophrenia for many, many years, and she's totally, she's fine now. She's stable. She had her schizophrenia injection yesterday, just once every 3 weeks. And she's good to go, active grandmother, runs the home. And so the idea is to share experiences, share what does strength mean to you? What does resilience mean to different people, so that we can learn from each other? And where do you get hope from, right? How do you build faith and optimism and the possibility of getting better in conditions and diseases that look so bad and so unmanageable?
Yeah, and I think I completely understand what you're saying, and it resonates with me as well, because I feel like we've spoken about the Health Collective, which I set up 8 years ago, and we had this hashtag called Not Alone, because we realized as much as we want to share resources and link to access helplines and so on, we realized when people started sharing their own stories, and initially it was actually literally 3 people, one of them was anonymous, one chose a pseudonym, it just opened the door for everyone else. And I find that it is that kind of community support that can make such a huge difference. I think no one expects you to sit there and be like, oh, there's going to be a quick fix, or like, those lovely Insta things, which I also scroll through, where you're like, oh, these 3 tips will mean that your anxiety is over. But they do want to know that they're not alone. And I think we want to know we're not alone. I do want to ask you a little bit more about this. And I feel that, for me, one of the interviews I did with Dr. Patel, with Dr. Vikram Patel, was the one where I was like, oh, wait, hold on. There's that, moment where the penny drops. So he's like, we all have mental health, and don't conflate mental health and mental illness, which is also super common. But we should all be learning how to, protect our own mental health and, advocate for ourselves. Can I ask you a little bit about, for you, what's been sort of an aha moment when you've been traveling globally or in India? And what's a myth you think that still persists in 2024 that you would like to bust?
I think, we were just at a morning breakfast, the Young Global Leader community, with Professor Schwab, actually, who's the founder of WEF. And the conversation was really around, are we optimistic or pessimistic about the future? Do we have more fear or hope for the future? And, the thing that I fear the most is how there is more and more of a fracturing of our inner selves, how our sense of identity is coming from so many things external of us, whether it is our job or our title or our car or the money we make and our bank balance, or our children or the family name, right? But I think the real sense of self is struggling. And that, to me, the questions around resilience, we use the word resilience very loosely. I feel like it's misunderstood as being strong and powering through and rising to every fight. I don't think that that's the case at all. I've used resilience till it ran out for 20 years of my life, and then it did run out. And I think in younger days, when we have no other way to cope, you will fight, you will freeze. But I think as you grow, there has to be a switch. We have to realize that the habits that helped us get till there are the habits that are going to make us now not grow further if we don't change them and shed them, right? For a lot of people, we're going through life wearing that mask, pretending to be somebody we may not necessarily be, getting our identity more from the human doing, and from what we do and our role in the world rather than who we really are. And then we have Instagram lives, which are separate from our real lives, right?
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
my question really is, in a world that is so fast paced and so distracted, do we really know who we are? And are we thinking about where we're coming from and what makes us who we are, right? And how about that shaping our direction in life and our choices in life, right? Now, I know it's a position of privilege. I feel I'm privileged that I'm in a place where I'm able to serve exactly what I feel I've been sort of intending and intended to serve, right? But
Yeah.
I know that's a point of phenomenal privilege. That may not be the case, but can we at least remain in touch with ourselves and remain true to that person? I think that to me is the biggest quest. Mental health belongs to everyone, and yes, mental illness is a 1 in 4 problem. And yes, it is true that there's a 95% treatment gap in India, with 200 million or 300 million people suffering from mental illness. But I think the real challenge is, if we will only get help if we feel there's a problem. Do we understand the problem? Do we recognize it? Do we know how much we can rely on ourselves? And do we know when to rely on community or a provider that actually has the expertise to support us in that journey, right? And this applies to children and young people just as much as adults, or single people as much as in families, or LGBTQ folks as much as sort of elderly parents dealing with dementia. It's true across the board.
So let me ask you, towards the start of this, podcast chat, you said this heartbreaking thing where you said when you were younger, you were like a shadow of yourself because you felt like you had nothing to lose. When we're talking about even your mid-20s, can you take us through a little bit of, did you have a support system around you? Did you have people you could talk to? Maybe not, in high school or school, but as you were growing up, were you able to find your community, which, now we can see, of course, and again, post-pandemic, there's a lot more. And you yourself are supporting so many peer-led communities. Shout out to Vijay Nalawala and the Bipolar India team and the work Amaha is doing. But did you have a support system around you? Were there people you could talk to honestly about what was going on without fear, without being judged, without shame, which seems to attach itself to a lot of these experiences?
There's fear, there's shame, and then there's the fear of shame, right? And so much of how we show up in the world and how we interact is coming from there, right? When you see a family that looks distressed and troubled and is dealing with something that people don't even know what it is. I mean, in the 1980s, what was schizophrenia was not even clear to us and to everybody around us, right? Meant that you could just be sort of lost in the darkness, right? And left alone to figure out and navigate your way. I know for many years as a child, I tried to hide that from my classmates and from my school. It was something that I felt a lot of shame on, that I didn't have a normal home, a normal upbringing. There was a sort of several difficulties and traumas that was even hard to explain. Some of it didn't even make any sense. It was beyond reality. How do you even explain that? The 10-year period that my mother was not there. How do you explain to classmates that I don't know where my mother is, right? And to me, there were times when I would cry myself to sleep, but there were also times when I would just go and run on the sports field, right? I think the phase after that was one of realizing that actually you can't, there is a finite period that you can fake it to make it, that you can power through, that you can just sort of be strong and be bold and just not cry, right? And it's what keeps you away from yourself, right? It is our fear of feeling all our feelings, of owning all our experiences, that keeps us away from ourselves. And so when I was in my early 20s is when I realized that actually, you know what, I'm just going to accept it. And there wasn't any choice. I mean, my mom was back and she was in hospital in treatment for 4 or 5 years as we did trial and error on trying to plow through, untreated psychosis of 20 years. My brother was struggling, my younger brother, wanting to reintegrate back into society, struggling with how to do that, playing catch up and trying to have a normal life, with the normal success markers that the world validates and endorses. it was a real big struggle, and it's a struggle that it was very hard for him to sustain after a while, given that he had lost his whole childhood, and yet people perceive that as weakness, whereas actually, to me, if you have a life of such trauma at such a young age, it's very difficult to piece yourself together, and it's only so long that you can pretend, right? So somewhere in my early 20s, I just dropped it. I literally just had a moment in time, maybe for a few months. I remember I was in London. I had just gone there to do a master's, and I spent a bit of time just sitting in bed eating Ben and Jerry's and just feeling my feelings, and it was hard. It was really hard to, you're almost scared of the pain and the suffering, because it's something that you've not allowed yourself to feel because you've never felt safe enough, right? But actually being away from it all and being on my own really helped. And then it was summertime, and I came out and went for a walk in the park, and healing has a funny way of occurring when you're not trying to like time it and rush it. It just sort of unfolds. And that's when I knew I was ready to come back to India, and I was ready to take something on, and that was the start of the India Art Fair, actually. And I became a mother a few years later, and my little girl would go in my Baby Beyond jacket everywhere. I breastfed my child at the art fair in a vanity van, while doing media interviews, and you wing it. You're in your 20s, and you're an entrepreneur, and you're a mother. But again, it was important to slow down. It was important to enjoy motherhood. I feel like I relive my childhood, or I'm living my childhood for the first time with my daughter. And so my 40s are really my 20s, and I'm hoping to carry through with that energy and passion and spontaneous joy.
I love that. I love that. I do want to ask you a little bit about, when you decide to switch careers, and for anyone listening, I mean, firstly, we should take a moment and, firstly, thank you for sharing this so openly as you have, on other platforms as well. And anyone listening, we will have resources. We'll link to Amaha, we'll link to the Health Collective, and, just for people to know that they're not alone. I think it's so important, whatever you're going through, especially now that there are more resources available. But, sidetracking a little bit to talk about the career side of things. And you just talked about what it's like to be an entrepreneur in your 20s. How important was it for you to have these certain markers of success for yourself, these certain goals that you wanted to hit even before you switched streams and started all over again? Because it's hard enough and daunting enough the first time round. I was telling you a little bit about how it can feel very, disorienting when you do a mid-career switch or a career transition, right? And the goalposts change. You're not really sure exactly what you're measuring yourself up against. We talked a little bit about self-worth, and it's as important as it is to take that time out. It requires acknowledging that your self-worth doesn't have to be derived from all of these external markers. But how hard has that been for you to navigate, and how do you look at success today as a leader?
Well, to do with the shifts in life, to do with the notion of resilience that I'm talking about, which is really coming from the authenticity of being true to yourself, and identifying a purpose that you're truly passionate about. I think for me, that has been easy because it's just been obvious. It's been sort of almost a way of life. There is no difference between my personal life and my professional life. If I'm helping a friend's friend or if I'm helping someone at Amaha, and I'm constantly being helped and learning from what the community shares, right? Which we then bring back into Amaha. And Amit and I spend a lot of time with our clinical team and community teams learning and incorporating that. So I think, this idea of career and milestones and sort of this visualization that it has to be an incremental journey, right? First you do step 1 and then step 2 and step 3. I've never thought about any of this. I mean, I don't think I've studied business. I haven't studied management. Frankly, I haven't studied art. I'm not a specialist. I'm not even a trained mental health person. But what I have studied is life and relationships, and just by simply living very deeply and very intensely through very traumatic moments, I feel like some of us have the blessing of trauma, and in that sense there is no choice but to really be asking the hard questions. After that, though, it becomes much easier. So my way of making choices or thinking about direction, or it's not about planning a career. It's certainly not about milestones. If anything, it is about a vision of where is it that I want to try and make some impact. In what way? What are the values? What are the methodologies? What are my boundaries? How do I want to do that? And then to basically orchestrate whatever enterprise there is that kind of fits that bill, right? I think that's sort of the intention. And so for me, the focus was always to work on moderate to severe mental illness. People, when it really is a condition that needs treatment, it needs psychiatric or therapeutic intervention, maybe medication, maybe residential admission for a while, because it is very hard for families to cope. How do you actually build a support system and not just a one-off appointment? So how can it be more ongoing support? And that's why at Amaha we say your mental health partner, because I think the belief is, how do we actually partner with people in their journey of care? And so, I do think visually, and I'm a Piscean. I love to daydream. And so my way of looking at it really is to think sort of look at the big picture. The art fair business plan was also drawn on an airline sickness bag. So you can tell I'm not an Excel person. But thankfully, my business partner, Amit, who founded this organization in the first place, is really the one who runs it and operates it and is so detail oriented. And I'm so thankful for him, because we have been able to bring this lived experience together with his clinical insights and building a large scale organization. And today we're the largest mental health organization in the country. We are across 600 cities. We did 100,000 therapy sessions last year. We do 18 languages. And we're opening our first inpatient residential center in Bangalore in 2 months' time, right? So the idea of not going to one celebrity doctor who you know and feeling ill-equipped or out of depth, can we trust an organization? And I hope there are many Amahas and many, many platforms that people can go to. But the dream really for me was, if I don't have anyone to go to, and if I don't know anyone, I'm not privileged, I don't have access, I have very little money and resources, what do I do and who do I trust? And in this work, we're actually asking people to trust something and somebody when they're not even able to trust themselves fully, right? So we have to recognize the sensitivity and the vulnerability that people hold at these times and really build something that is so mindfully thought about, I'm in the Amaha Center right now in Bandra, but really to look at, what is the, right from like, what is the lighting and what are the plants, and, how can we make people feel like they're in the comfort of a safe space, and, where there is empathy and there is a sense of connection and belonging. So, so I think that's really it. So for me, this is a journey of being and belonging and finding a playing field that I feel I can either create and then, collaboratively work out what the new rules of engagement are. And so the category creation in a sector is what is most interesting to me. I've now realized, looking back at the art world as well, and now we set up the India Mental Health Alliance together with the Bharatrams. So again, recognizing that actually this sector is very fragmented, much like the art world, and people need to work together to be able to bring their strengths together and to be able to optimize and have greater impact. And so we're setting up the India Mental Health Alliance to do that and build capacity in training psychiatrists and psychologists, but also school teachers and policemen. And in this way, if you step back now and you say, what does it take to build an ecosystem for mental health care, right? You put the people who need care at the center of it, and then surround their family and their caregivers and their support system, whether it's the school teachers or it's their workplaces, and then be able to say, okay, how do we look at this in a cross-sectoral way? Because, education, health, gender, all of these issues intersect with mental health. So how do we really build an understanding of that and create something that is systemic and lasting? So as you can see, I'm very happy to be a drop in the ocean, but here it is an attempt to try and build an ecosystem for mental health in India.
And you've been very big on, trying to get stakeholders to collaborate, right? Like, I think that's clearly something where you look at Does it help that you've had this sort of? I keep coming back to success. I'll tell you why, because I wonder if, and as an anecdote, I feel like someone told me that you're the kind of person who people will be lining up to write checks for. I don't know if this is true or not true, but on the back of the success you had with the India Art Fair, did you come in, what kind of persona are you projecting? Like, I know my stuff when it comes to mental health. I know my stuff when it comes to business. Do you think it would have been harder to start with this, back in your 20s? So much has changed in India, so that's not even a fair question. But do you think it helped to have the business success that you've already had?
No, it helped to have the life experience that I already had.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think in my 20s, I wouldn't have done this because I was too busy struggling and grieving and healing and, busy sort of breaking and remaking my own sense of self, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have been out there in the world of mental health in my 20s because we were consolidating ourselves, right, as a family. And today my mother lives with me, my daughter is with me. We're an all-female household with a golden retriever. We moved from Delhi to Mumbai. I mean, we have a full, beautiful, vibrant life by the sea. And we needed a bit of time to come into our own, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you understand a problem very, very deeply, and you're committed only to that problem, not to a business model, not to what you think an investor wants to hear, not to what you think is the popular narrative. Everybody's building a tech solution for mental health. Let's all build an app. To really see what is the hardest piece. And it may not be something that comes together easily or seems to be the most quick win. But that's the stuff that I'm after, right? And
right.
If you believe in that and you want to fund that, then that's great. We've now raised over $10 million. But it is true that our first meeting did happen like this. And the anecdote is that my business partner and I went to our first investor. Well, before that, the Aspen Fellowship has been the starting ground of the mental health journey. And right after selling the art fair, I did the Eisenhower Fellowship for 2-3 months and then went into Aspen for the fellowship. And it really was a bunch of fellows who came together, helped me think about the model, and then find my way to also joining Amit and really try and structure this. But at our first VC meeting with Lightbox, we really sat in the reception and we were talking about it, and I said, these would be great people to have on board because, look, they really believe in doing good for humanity and doing good for the planet. And we had a little joke about how it doesn't work that way, but then it did. So yeah, I think now looking back, there is something to be said about the passion, the conviction, the ability to play the long game, and not being distracted by other people's opinion or definition of what success looks like and what a good outcome looks like.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for hours, but I have to be mindful of time and your crazy schedule as well. It's quite hectic at the best of times. So 2 final questions. Is there anything you're reading, listening to, or watching right now that's inspiring that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if there was one person to listen to and read right now, it is Gabor Mate and the work that he's doing and talking about constantly around compassionate inquiry, being kind and gentle to oneself, and really going into a curious self-exploration to unpack what our trauma journeys are and what are the stories we tell ourselves, what makes us who we are. A lot of the sort of young adult and inner child grieving that one needs to go through. And also the connection between mind and body, this idea of, I have an autoimmune, I know very much, with all these traumas, whether you look at complex PTSD or autoimmune conditions, a lot of it is coming from the adverse childhood traumas, right, that we have and what we go through. So very interested in following all his podcasts and joining his global compassionate inquiry circles and reading The Myth of Normal. And then talking with friends and colleagues about that. And I think for me, what I felt is really important in life is to build relationships. And I don't just mean that with the people in one's own family and friend circle. I just mean coming together around a cause, coming together around a conversation or in a moment in time, but to have deep, meaningful interactions. And I think COVID has made this us realize that actually that's where we really get our nurturance from. We have a sense of belonging. And in the world of today, we all need to be sort of rooted and feel connected and feel safe. And so if we can do that for ourselves and, have people in our life who can do that, I don't think it needs to be family. I think it could be anyone who sees you for who you are and who you can connect with and have sort of a common language with. So I'm very passionate about weaving communities and relationships and also bringing more richness into my life and sharing as much.
Even personally, it sounds like. And then just finally, I don't know, would you have a message for your younger self? Is there something you'd like to tell your inner child or younger self? Maybe just even a snapshot of your life right now, just to be like, hey,
I think the only thing I would have wanted to hear as a young person is that somebody's got my back. So I would say, there will be a time when we will grow enough to be able to have our back. I think that's what I would say. Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Because it is the idea of reparenting. A lot of us carry that, if you're once broken, forever broken, and then there's a sense of blaming and victimization and resentment. We're sort of in this loop, right? But how do we get out of that is to take responsibility. If we do that in our adult self, we can actually tell our resentful, grudging victim child that, I've got your back. So
I love that. And as you said, like grow, seeing your child grow in a safe space and thrive, it's a nice way for you to also, maybe this is the secret to how you look so young, is that you're in your 20s right now, actually not my age, struggling with midlife crises and whatnot. Neha, thank you so much.
My grandmother lived to 102, so those are my genes.
Oh, that's incredible. 102. Okay. Well, there are a lot of tech billionaires who want to know what's the secret sauce to that as well. Maybe on our next chat. Thank you so much for being so open and for all that you're doing. And thank you for taking out the time today as well to be on this podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure.